My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of
Greetings, constant listeners, and welcome yet again to the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast. My name is Rockin' Randall Colburn, and today we are touching on one of King's perhaps not most well-known villains, but most beloved within King's dominion, a little monster named Tack. This is the beginning of a multi-part series in which we're going to discuss Desperation and Regulators, both released in 1996. One, Desperation as Stephen King, one, Regulators as Richard Bachman. They were co-released together on September 24th, 1996, number one bestsellers for 15 weeks. I think Desperation was always ahead of Regulators, but they were always at the top. And yeah, we're going to discuss Desperation, we're going to discuss Regulators, and then we're going to do an episode where we kind of discuss sort of the alternate worlds that are happening here, the fact that these two books share characters and plot points and things of that nature. It's going to be really cool. But before we dive into this, let's say hello to our panel. And when you introduce yourself, please also tell us your first experience with the book, whether it was reading it, seeing it in a bookstore, whatever, as well as what edition you read on this round. Jen, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hi, this is Jenn. I hate critics, Adams, and I first read this on my chronological reread. So it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, when I got to it, and I'd already read Regulators. And for some reason, I think it looked too Western to me, and that's just not one of my favorite genres. So I'd avoided it and got to it, and it really, I have such mixed feelings about this book, but it's one that really challenges me, and I turn over a lot of the thoughts. And so I have this memory when I was teaching of drinking cold brew coffee for the first time and going into my principal's office and getting so amped up on the caffeine and just talking about this book nonstop to her, and the concept of God being cruel until it was a mile a minute. And at some point I remember she called the secretary to come in and talk to her about something. And so that's my memory that's tied with this. But this is this time I read the audiobook, and I referenced the Signet paperback edition. I'm really looking forward to talking about this one because there's a lot here, and I actually had to listen to it twice for this episode because my mind does not want to accept this book. It's so hard for me to wrap my brain around the concepts, and it's really harsh in places, and I love a lot of what it's saying, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about some other things, but really looking forward to talking about it. So
Who did the audiobook?
Kathy Bates.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought it was Kathy Bates. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is cool. She does a great job.
Dan, why don't you say hello, and how did you first encounter this book?
This is Dan Pfleegor, and great character. Yeah, so I actually read this book in 2005, and it was gifted to me by Dan Caffrey, his mother.
Fellow loser.
Yeah, she used to run a charter school, and one time she was kind of clearing out the library, so she gave me both first editions of this and the Regulators. So I read it in 2005. I read it again this past summer, and then this time I actually did the audiobook with Stephen King narrating.
Oh,
really?
I didn't know there was one with him.
It's great because, there's always people have their little accents and ways of saying things, and when he says vegan, he says vegan. Really? She was on a vegan diet, and I was like, did he?
Oh, Steve.
Yeah, and I was like, is that on purpose, or did he just, I don't know. But it was just cracking me up. But I kind of agree with Jen. I enjoy this book, but I have trouble distinguishing the characters sometimes, and that's not usually something I have issues with. I mean, I get the main characters, but some of the peripheral ones, they kind of, I had to go back and be like, wait, who said that? And reread it. So a
lot of people come fast and furious at the end when the flashbacks start happening.
Right.
What edition did you read for this one?
This was the first edition.
Oh,
so
nice.
You can see behind me, I've got them displayed.
You got them set up.
Yeah, so I always thought that was really cool with the covers, just how they
intersect.
pair up.
Yeah, cool. And then joining us, we have Ana Marie Cox. Say hello.
Hi, this is Ana Marie Audrey Weiler Cox. And sort of my funny story about this book is that I don't remember the first time I read it because it was during my drinking years. And one of the benefits of being a drunk is that you get to reread books all the time and kind of rediscover them. And I cannot tell you like how many Stephen King books that's true of for me, that like I have remembered that I liked them, but then not much else about them, but you get to, you know, reread them for the very first time. So this was probably the third time I read this book, but probably the most clear.
Yeah.
Although I did read it in the process of moving. So that's another kind of dementia, I guess. But you know what? It's always, I guess, sort of like with Jenn, like it's just always kind of stuck with me. Like even when I read it in my drinking years, which is, you know, kind of ironic also given, you know, all the kind of AA themes I know we're going to talk about. Something about it just tangled with me. The Shining's the same way. Like I think those are two of his, you know, most deeply, I mean, addiction runs is a thread throughout his work, which I love, but those are the two books that to me like really kind of tangle with it in a way that connects with who I am. So I'm excited to talk about it, especially now, like full of AA in my head and being able to see like the sort of clear kind of parallels he's either consciously or not consciously drawing with kind of the theology they have in AA and the theology of this book. So
yeah. And what edition did you read on this reread?
Oh, I have the first one as well. I got the first one. I bought on like eBay. They're not expensive because they were such bestsellers, but I got the eBay.
Yeah,
I got the first edition of both of them, and the covers are cool.
Yeah, they are. I first read this book back when it came out. I had the Signet edition with the bear head. Oh, you have it too.
That's mine, yeah.
I love it. Yeah. And I have sort of fond memories of this one in sort of a weird way. I was very much an indoor kid when I was growing up, and my parents were not. They loved, and we would go on vacation once a year to Houghton Lake in Michigan. And I didn't like fishing. Now I love fishing. Now I love like outdoor stuff. But when I was a kid, I hated it. And they would always make me go out in the boat. And so I bought Desperation at like a Walmart or something in Houghton Lake. And then I took it out on the boat every time my parents would make me. So I read the majority of this while like drifting across Houghton Lake as my parents fished. And I just read it in the corner of the boat by myself, like a little weirdo. And I absolutely loved it. And I think I liked it because it was nasty in the way that I enjoyed King's nastier works. When I was young, I love all the gore. I love all sort of the various adult intrigue that sort of happens here. And I also was very interested in the religious themes, although, and perhaps I'll talk about this a little bit more, but I've always had a, you know, pretty intense, weird relationship with Christianity, despite not being raised with it. And I think a lot of it had to do with various movies and books that I read when I was young that were, and I wouldn't call this book actively Christian necessarily, but it is, it does portray, it's similar to The Stand in that it seems to exist in a world where there is a God and there, you know, where there's a great good and there's a great evil. And I think because my familiarity was only with Christianity when I was that age, I filtered it all through that lens. And it contributed in a lot of ways, I think, to when I got saved when I was in college and I became like a very intense evangelical Christian. And I think a lot of it, I had developed this sort of vision of God based on all these different things I'd read. And a lot of it had to do with The Stand and with Desperation. So this book, and rereading it now, this is probably my third read, but my first in many, many, many years. And so it's really kind of fun to revisit with a more nuanced understanding of God, what this book is actually trying to do and what King was probably struggling with at the time. So and I read it on my Kindle, so I didn't reread this specific version. And I don't think this is the version I owned. I just got a bunch of King books back from Mike that we used to have in our old office. And I don't think this is mine because I remember mine was really beaten up, but he gave it to me anyways. So I never had the cool hardcover editions, which I wish I did because they look cool as hell. And on that note, let's pop into just discuss the history of this a little bit. It was written between November 1st, 1994 and December 5th, 1995, released by Viking on September 24th, 96. And it was co-released with The Regulators, which very strange sort of marketing move. But King was really into these sort of gimmicky releases at the time. He also released The Green Mile in installments in the same way that I believe Dickens used to, and he was very interested in these marketing gimmicks, and that would stick with him too, because it was only a few years later that he released the first ebook, which was Riding the Bullet, and really kind of pushing the boundaries of what. Because I think he had all this power within the publishing world, and he was like, well, what can we do to make it more interesting? And so the Desperation and Regulators were released together with covers that intersected. Really cool artwork. Love it. As for where this book came from, he was inspired to write it while driving his daughter's car across the country back in 1991. He visited a small desert community, Ruth, Nevada, near US 50, and he was driving through it, and it was really empty and creepy, and his first thought was that the town's inhabitants were all dead. He then wondered who had killed them, and the voice in his head said it was the sheriff. Cut to September 1994, and King hopped on his Harley, did a 10-city tour of independent bookstores in support of Insomnia. I believe we talked about that in our Insomnia episode. And it was right after that he started writing the book. And Johnny Marinville, one of the main characters, he is doing a very similar sort of hopping on his Harley, riding across the country. So clearly a lot of King in that character and in this story.
Wait, he wrote about an author? He wrote about an author. Let me just... Sorry, not to derail.
On a Harley.
Okay.
On a Harley.
Wow. Novel approach. Okay. Resume.
No pun intended.
Yeah. And then, halfway through writing, he got an idea for another book about quote unquote guns, toys, and suburbia, and decided to write The Regulators using the characters from Desperation and publish both books simultaneously. Really strange, interesting stuff there. And then I guess I pulled some quotes here just to kind of get a read on King's mindset regarding desperation, but also his mindset regarding God. This is generally, as we've hinted at, this is generally considered one of the more explicitly spiritual books that King has written. One of the main characters, David Carver, who's a 10-year-old boy, he basically is a incredibly devout Christian after his best friend, who was injured in a horrible car accident, was miraculously recovered after David prayed to God to heal him. And he has developed this sort of quiet, miraculous spirituality that his parents think is weird, which I relate to because my parents thought it was weird when I became a Christian as well. So, which is another thing I think I related to about this book when I was younger. Basically, if you're listening to this, you probably do know the whole story. The arc of the book does find many characters sort of coming to terms with the idea that they are on a mission from God to take out this evil entity born from, the bowels of the earth called Tack. And so it's interesting stuff. So I figured it would be helpful to find some quotes from King about God and things of that nature. So I'll read one here. This is from a Salon interview in 2008. He says, "I was raised Christian, and I was raised to believe in the idea of the Antichrist. My wife said that she was raised a Catholic. The attitude of the Catholic Church is, give them to me when they're young, and they'll be mine forever. It isn't really true. A lot of us grew up and we grow out of the literal interpretation that we get when we're children, but we bear the scars all our life. Whether they're scars of beauty or scars of ugliness, it's pretty much in the eye of the beholder." He continues later, "It's an effort to say, let's give God his due here. Too often in novels that are speculative, God is a kind of kryptonite, and that's about all that it is. And it goes back to Dracula, where someone dumps a crucifix in Count Dracula's face, and he pulls away and runs back into his house. That's not religion. That's some kind of juju, like a talisman. I wanted to do more than that. I wanted to explore what that means to be able to rise above adversity by faith, because it's something most of us do every day. We may not call it Christianity. I wanted to do that. I wanted it to be a God trip." So that's him speaking directly about desperation. Does anything here when I guess I think a lot about The Stand, where when he talks about this idea of God being kryptonite, I can see that sort of in the hand of God sequence at the end of The Stand. Does anyone else have thoughts on perhaps the God of The Stand versus the God of Desperation, and what perhaps what ties we can perhaps draw between them? Pfleegor, what do you think?
Yeah. So, as someone who was raised Roman Catholic, which is the much more ancient form of Catholicism, this book felt like Old Testament God, and The Stand felt like New Testament God. Old Testament is a lot more of a black and white God. I mean, he even says like he's a jealous God, right? He's cruel. There's not a lot of talk. I mean, even kind of what you were saying with like the talismans and the holy water can burn a vampire. It's sort of this ancient, almost superstition to me. And someone who's not religious anymore, seeing The Stand, it reminded me of my friends who were like evangelicals and born again, where it was like, God is love. And I was like, that's not what I'm hearing when I go to church. I'm hearing a lot of fire and brimstone. So I think I would actually say this is more religious than The Stand, just because it's very explicit. Whereas in The Stand, there's still some characters that are like, well, maybe there's another explanation. Even though the evidence is all there, there's a little more skepticism. Whereas this, I think it's hard to doubt David and his powers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know. I think I think the Old Testament God is pretty present in The Stand. They just don't talk about the cruelty as much, I feel like. I mean, any God that would, slaughter 99.9% of humanity, that's pretty cruel,
That's true.
Yeah.
But what's one of the things that actually I think is a weakness of The Stand is they don't ponder that much. Like those who survive are kind of like, oh, wow, well, it's really terrible that everyone died. And I guess God is calling us. So cool, like,
Yeah.
but there's one of the weaknesses is there's very little kind of survivor's guilt in The Stand, which I don't know. I feel survivor's guilt now, like in the middle of a pandemic and being healthy and employed and whatnot, and I do think that this is an attempt to grapple more seriously, more consciously with God's cruelty. And I find it kind of satisfying. Like, I think it's a real, I mean, I don't know if I believe all the answers that King kind of comes up with, but I think it's a real genuine grappling with it. And not kind of like The Stand The Stand doesn't try to engage with the cruelty of God. It just looks at like the beneficence, whatever, goodness. The other thing I would say in comparing the theology of this to the theology of The Stand is the evil is somewhat consistent too, which is to say that the evil is powerful but capricious and ultimately dependent on others to enact its evil. Like that it needs people to have faith in it, or it needs people to want something from it. And of course in The Stand, it's like the Randall flag levitating or not, right? Like he only can levitate, he only has power if everyone gives him power. And I feel like there's a similar thing going on here with Tak. I mean, I always think of King's evils always have some great weakness, and it's like, I think it's pride and arrogance. Like all of his big bads, like that's their, if you look at it too, right? Like they're always kind of the bastard children of whatever greater power there is, and always kind of wanting too much. So
yeah, I love that. Like that's something I think about a lot is sort of the inherent that the fact that a lot of the evils, they feel like fail sons in their own way, like they're trying to be a little bit too big for their britches, and that's and then it kind of often results in sort of infrastructural collapse, which I find very funny. Jenn, did you have thoughts?
I did. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I'm going to try to keep it separate from my thoughts about like AA and recovery, but it's just, they're so intertwined. And I was raised, I've been going to church my entire life and was raised Methodist and Presbyterian, which have a lot of overlapping guiding principles. But I read this when I was still kind of a believer, and I don't want to say I'm not a believer anymore, but there was a certain point where I really turned away, and I said, I still believe in this, but I don't want this. And it was, so when I look at the difference between Desperation and The Stand, I feel like, Anna, I think you're totally right. I think he is wrestling with his understanding of religion and God. And I think the difference I see in The Stand and Desperation is there's so much more choice, I think I see in The Stand. I think people are really deciding which way they want to go. And here, I think, and this is where the AA stuff kind of comes in. I think we see characters struggling with the idea that maybe they don't have choice and that they are not as powerful as and that's the thing that gets me. And where I love Desperation in the struggle, because I think he does a fantastic job of really exploring what this means on a day-to-day basis, to say, I don't have control over my life, and how scary that is and how heartbreaking that can be. And that is like an entryway into me wrestling with that. What I don't think I like is the ultimate conclusion I feel like he's coming to, because I feel like there is, I think manipulation is too harsh of a word, but I feel like King comes to his conclusion at the end of the book, and it's not the conclusion that I want. And if it is, and I just want to say to everyone listening, like, these are my personal ideas, and I don't want anyone to feel like I'm judging. Like, I feel like this is just something we all kind of have to wrestle with for ourselves, you know?
I want to add, as everyone else did, that I was very fortunate to be raised without religion. Everyone else had to get in there, like, you know, how I was raised, which has made it much easier for me. Like when I got into AA, for instance, I was like, all right, you know, okay, like God of my understanding, which is what they ask you to have in AA. All right, you know, I can come up with a God that seems pretty cool. And also I should be dead, and I'm not. So I'm willing to believe that there is some reason that I'm alive. That was kind of my initial way of being able to accept the idea of a higher power. That can get you pretty far, by the way, the whole I should be dead, I'm not part for people who are in addiction. And because it's true for me like 1,000 times over. And one of the things I connect with Johnny Marinville is how he talks about his brushes with death and all those times that he should be dead and he's not. And he kind of has to kind of think about, well, maybe there's a reason. Then I have to say, Jen, I never quite connected the whole powerless over, you know, drugs and alcohol and powerless over my, you know, things outside myself with this particular kind of narrative plot in The Stand or in Desperation. And that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was thinking a lot about the idea of cruelty as it existed in The Stand, because I think I was reading Desperation as I was watching the CBS. We just, you know, finished recapping the CBS All Access miniseries. And I guess one of the only times that I think that series really kind of captured the idea of what kind of God exists within the world of The Stand was at the end when, you know, spoiler alert for the Stand, but when sort of, you know, the hand of God kind of falls down, but it's, you know, basically shooting these lightning bolts throughout the casino. And it's and you do see that there's this kind of uprising against Randall Flagg in those final moments, which is something we see a little bit in the 94 version and in the book, but here it's a bit more pronounced. All these people are chanting, I will fear no evil. And there's like a couple people that, you know, the people all begin turning on each other, but God is sort of not discerning in terms of who he destroys at the end of that. You see the lightning bolts kind of cutting open, you know, exploding all the biggest villains that we dealt with the whole season, but then also even the people who kind of, you know, turned against Flagg in the end. There is that sort of unfeeling sense that, you know, the whole herd must be culled, you know, my judgment is final. Like you waited too long to make your choice, you know, and that to me is very interesting and something I think I struggled with God's cruelty when I was Christian, because I was a little bit older, you know, I was in my late teens and early 20s when I was evangelical. And I think it was really hard for me because, Anna, I love what you said about creating your own God. Like, okay, I can develop my own sort of higher power. But for me, I always felt very hamstrung by, I was, you know, going to a very deeply fundamentalist church, and there was a very specific idea of what God was. And I really struggled with that. And that was the thing, was I couldn't there's no space within that faith to shape what God is to you. God is a very specific thing, and that is what you adhere to. And I really struggled with that. And it's something I still struggle with because my wife is a Christian, and I love her church and I go, but I don't consider myself a Christian because her church is really chill and they have a very sort of, they don't see the text as literal, you know, and I like that, but at the same time I struggle with that because I always point to various parts of scripture where it's about, you know, the word is the word, and we kind of have these fun devil's advocate conversations where my old fundamentalism comes back and I kind of try to poke holes in sort of the more welcoming faith that she's experienced. And I think a lot of that stems from that was what I used to hear when I would see my buddies going to the campus church and I was going to this other church, and you know, I would hear the arguments against that sort of looser faith. And I don't know, so I think about all those kinds of things. They're all popping up in my head here. But let me let's move on to, there's some other quotes in this Salon interview that I think are great. Let's read this here. And it's fun because he references the Left Behind books by Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye, which I read all of them.
Me
when
too.
I
I didn't
was
read them
younger.
all, but I read some of them.
Oh my God. We have to talk about that sometime.
Yes.
I'm actually working on a documentary proposal about Tim LaHaye.
Oh
Oh,
my
wow.
God. I would watch the hell out of that. So, okay. It's a mystery. That's the first thing that interests me about the idea of God. If there is one, it's mysterious and powerful and awesome to even consider the concept, and you have to take it seriously. I understand where Bill Maher is coming from when he says basically the world is destroying itself over a bunch of fairy tales and talking snakes and men who are alive inside fishes. I'm very sympathetic to it, but at the same time, given the cosmos that we're living in, it's very persuasive, the idea that there is some kind of first cause that's running things. It might not be the God of Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. It might not be the God of Al-Qaeda, and it might not be the God of Abraham, but something very well could be running things. The order of the universe as we see it, the interlocking nature, and the way things work together are persuasive of the idea that there may be some overarching first cause. And I like these quotes in a way because he's very much trying to not like pigeonhole his God or pigeonhole his faith. He's basically saying, like, the concept of a God is something that is very appealing. And that's something I think I understand a lot too, because I think that's what drove me to Christianity was the concept of a higher power. But then I didn't necessarily like the higher power that I was kind of being encouraged to believe in.
Yeah.
Well, and when I hear him say that, I think, okay, well, you're talking about Ka. That's the overarching force that you're thinking. And I really had to come to that point for myself, because I think the understanding that I had been bred into me about what God was is very patriarchal. It's very narcissistic, and it's very controlling. And that is so like entwined with my relationship with my parents just in general. And that is what I really resisted. And I remember I read a book called The Shack, which I don't know if you've read, but I don't know that one. It's a very, very religious, like, here's my message and I'm going to beat you over the head with it. I found a lot of comfort in it at the time, mainly because it kind of opened my understanding of, I can view God as the way that it works for me. And then I kind of got involved with AA and heard higher power of my understanding. And I was like, okay, I love that. I can work with that. It's just so hard for me to unravel, like, years and years and years of just, this is the right thing, this is the right way. And if you're not that right way, then you're doing the wrong thing. And that's what I think is interesting in this book is I feel like King is wrestling with what that specific God is. And I think when we have more thoughts about that when we talk about
we're going to talk overarching here. I just want to note, and anyone who's listening to this podcast realize it, but it's coming to my mind as we're talking, which is it's an irony that I think King sometimes talks about, but he hates evangelicals so much.
He does. They're so often
they're
the bad
often
guys.
the bad guys. He has that whole book, like pretty recent one that's about the revival. That's right, the televangelist. Like, it's just such an interesting. I almost have felt in the past like he's having to say, like, yes, I'm religious, but don't you see how much or yes, I'm spiritual, or whatever they say in AA, like, but see how much I hate religion. See, like, I'm not trying to tell you to be Christian, because I hate Christians too. And it's just such an interesting tension in his work. And I just don't know how much he realizes he's doing that, but maybe we're going to get to the book soon. I don't know.
Oh yeah, we will. No, I think it's helpful to kind of talk about, I think it's helpful too for us to kind of like touch on a little bit of our own, what we're bringing into the book. But similar to what you just said, in a Time interview from 2009, he said, "I always wanted to say that you can still reconcile the idea that things are not necessarily going to go well without falling back on platitudes like God has a plan and this is for the greater good. It's possible to be in pain and still believe that there is some force for good in the universe. That certainly doesn't mean to say that everybody should go out and join the First United Church of my God is bigger than your God. That's half the trouble with the world, maybe more." So I feel like that relates to what you were saying, Anna, in terms of his sort of resistance to a lot of modern modes of religion.
I think, just if I can weigh in on that too.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think there's a satisfaction that we all have with finding hypocrisy, right? So
Yeah.
I think part of it is maybe why it seems like he's picking on certain groups too, is that, you know, you're constantly seeing a scandal of somebody was embezzling money, somebody has a private jet. And that happens all over in every ideology. But when it's somebody who's specifically preaching about your sins that you're committing and then you catch them doing it, you know, I think there's a sick pleasure we all kind of get in that, seeing them kind of collapse and crumble, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know also his daughter is a Unitarian Universalist minister, which is not, and I went to a UU church for a while and I really enjoyed it, but it's not really religious. It's like a lot of the people that were there were like expats from church, you know, that had been like wounded by a lot of the hypocrisy we were talking about. So I wonder if that's kind of where a lot of it comes from, is that he's just around or hears from his daughter a lot of people that have been hurt by church. I put in church in quotations.
So when I said I wasn't raised in a religion, I should add that to the extent I was, it was UU.
Oh, really?
Which I often call like agnostics without the courage of conviction.
Yep.
Like
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So that's like, to the extent I was exposed to religion, it was to this totally like namby. Well, I mean, UU churches are amazing. They tended to be very involved in their communities and they do a lot of social work. And I do feel like they're welcoming to people who are looking for some kind of spiritual community that isn't, you know, patriarchal, that isn't like, you know, there's a lot to be said for UU churches. I will say that it was having that been my only exposure to religion that probably caused me in high school to get really interested in evangelical religion and kind of flirt with it, because I was like, oh, so you have a good and a bad. All right, you know. And then eventually they told me I had to either get saved or stop coming to meetings. So
I faced that similar ultimatum. I went the other direction though. One last quote here about the idea of God as being cruel, and this is from that same Salon interview. I find this quote very compelling. The other thing that's interested me ever since I was a kid was the idea that's baldly articulated in Desperation, and that is that God is cruel. I always in my mind equated Mother Abigail with Moses and the story of Moses taking credit for the water coming from the rock and being forbidden to get to the promised land because of that one thing, that one slip where God is cruel. And I wanted to use those things and say two things. First, that the myths are difficult and suggest a difficult moral path through life. And second, that they are ultimately more fruitful and more earth-friendly than the God of technology, the God of the microchip, the God of the cell phone. I think he wrote that around the time he was working on Cell. So interesting idea there. And then he kind of made national headlines, I remember, with this NPR interview from 2014, where he essentially said, like, kind of, you know, confirmed that he believes in God. And I remember this being sort of a thing. And yeah, here's the quote. I choose to believe it. I mean, there's no downside to that. If you say, well, okay, I don't believe in God, there's no evidence of God, then you're missing the stars in the sky, and you're missing the sunrises and sunsets, and you're missing the fact that bees pollinate all these crops and keep us alive, and the way that everything seems to work together. Everything is sort of built in a way that, to me, suggests intelligent design. But at the same time, there's a lot of things in life where you say to yourself, well, if this is God's plan, it's very peculiar. And you have to wonder about that guy's personality, the big guy's personality. And the thing is, I may have told you last time that I believe in God. What I'm saying now is I choose to believe in God, but I have serious doubts and I refuse to be pinned down to something that I said 10 or 12 years ago. I'm totally inconsistent. And that's from this 2014 interview, which was, you know, about 5-6 years after he gave those other interviews. And I mean, almost 20 years since he wrote Desperation. So this idea of choosing to believe in God is something that I'm not necessarily sure I see in The Stand or in Desperation. There is a choice that is made in The Stand, but each one you're sort of making a choice to this, it's more of a moral thing. Here is this sense of he seems to find comfort in the idea of God, and he chooses that. And I find that interesting, and I think that's probably something that comes with I don't know, age and experience. So any off the cuff responses to that, or shall we move on to critical reviews of this book?
I think that The Stand has some choice.
Yeah.
Jen, if you want to go ahead, like I'll defer.
Because I think that when he's talking about choosing, like, it's really hard for me not to hear that and hear his experience with AA and like working steps, and like, because that's a big part of it, is accepting powerlessness. And I also think, like, I love the way he phrased that, because it's not a choice. And that, I think that's my problem with being saved in air quotes, is like, you don't say the magic words and then you're suddenly like on the right path for the rest of your life. And that's not how it works with addiction. Like, it is a constant thing that you have to deal with. Because I got saved when I was like 14, I think, and I feel like a lot of religions, like, they have this either or, like, you're either saved or you're not. And once you've crossed that threshold, it's like, okay, you're good and you do all the stuff and you're like a church person now. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be demeaning when I say that. I've had a lot of like the evangelical people were really mean to me in high school. So I'm carrying some of those scars. But I also
were mean to me too.
Were they?
Yeah.
But like, I think, and I mean, I keep wanting to talk about this, and we might get to it when we're in AA, but like, you make a choice at a certain point to admit that you need help from something greater than yourself. And I think that's what he's saying when he says, I choose. Like, I choose to accept this.
Yeah. Can I offer?
I think
go ahead, sorry.
Jen's onto something, but also, I mean, Glenn Bateman literally makes a choice.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he says, and sort of, it's a version of I should be dead, but I'm alive to me.
Mm-hmm.
In that when he talks about how, like, look, we have the best evidence ever that there is a God. Yeah. So I'm just going to go with it. Yeah. That's the kind of choice that I feel like I made, to find a God of my understanding, which is that I'm going to choose to believe that, there's all these different times when I literally, like, in emergency rooms and close calls with various kinds of danger. And I'm going to choose to think that there was something watching out for me. That's my evidence. Yeah. And, so I'm going to go with it. And I also, again, that's such an AA. It's so what he said, like, and it's also what I love about AA is that you do get to be inconsistent about it too. Like, there's no pressure to like, be like, I'm always going to have the same God of my understanding, or I'm always going to every day believe to the same degree that I believed yesterday. Yeah. And I think the Glenn actually stands in for that specific idea of making a choice.
Yeah, it's a good point.
No, I was going to just to expand on Glenn a little bit, with a little caveat too. It's just, I think though, King gives such overwhelming evidence that you almost have to believe, right? Because doesn't faith sort of the belief without proof? But here, they're having shared dreams in The Stand. They're witnessing miracles here. I think you'd almost be foolish not to embrace the concept of a God. So when Stephen King talks about, seeing the universe as proof, that's one person's interpretation of there being a God, but his characters get pretty firm miracles. So, I remember reading like Left Behind series, as we were talking about, and I believe the character's daughter is like an agnostic, and something will happen. And as I was reading it, I was like, this is proof God exists. And she's like, I don't know. And I kind of feel Stephen King's. Yeah, I know. So that's the thing. Like, I feel like it's like you all had this shared dream of people, and you're painting portraits predicting the future in The Stand, Glenn. Yeah, there's a God.
And we've got plenty in Desperation too, just pretty obvious signs of God's involvement. But let's talk a little bit about reviews, how this book was received when it first came out. Entertainment Weekly, often a very kind publication to King, gave it a B+ review in 1996. They said, Desperation finds him near the top of his game, albeit in a very different incarnation than that of the folksy humanist who narrated The Green Mile. In Desperation, King returns to apocalyptic terror mode. He hasn't been this intent on scaring readers or been this successful at it since The Stand. And then I was reading Brady Hendrix's Stephen King reread, which is always a great resource. And sort of his review from his 2015 piece, kind of looking back on it all these years later, he called it one of the most profound Christian novels of the second half of the 20th century. Involves a crazed cop ranting about Jews and blowjobs, cougar versus man combat, a live buzzard having its wings torn off, and a man ripping out his own tongue. So bold statement there, and very funny. Meanwhile, the New York Times, when the book first came out, was pretty harsh on it, and I thought some of these quotes were interesting. Throughout Desperation, Mr. King displays a perverse tic. Whenever he creates an episode with either graphic tear or political bite, and there are many such episodes, a volley of nervous giggles, usually of an arrested adolescent male variety, tends to follow. For instance, when Tack deviously tells Marinville he can heal him, the novelist riposts, "Yeah, but can you win me a goddamn Nobel Prize for literature?" The effect is if someone folded into a copy of the Inferno, a boy's adventure book. The Hardy Boys go to hell. The recurrent silliness shrugs off the horror and the social anger, as if Mr. King were admitting he doesn't really mean it. But what is he afraid of? To question his readiness to disturb his huge audience is probably going too far. Still, Mr. King appears troubled by the implications of his radical vision, as well as by his status as the world's most popular horror novelist. At one point, he has Marinville muse about writing a fantasy tale, perhaps even an outright horror novel, not the sort of stuff of which serious literature was made. But so what? It's a sour crack. Despite all the phantasmagoria, all the gore, Desperation simply isn't willing to be horrific enough. At their most daring, Mr. King's novels promise subversion, but instead deliver a parody of democracy in which every literary effect, Gnostic apocalypse and sentimental piety, social fury and boyish titillation, carries equal weight. So he's essentially pointing out that it's the pound cake that is what really brings down King's more serious ideas.
Right.
Yeah.
I find this book extremely horrific. Like maybe one of the harshest I've ever read of his, because it's got the emotion. Like I've read some, like Off Season comes to mind, but there's not the emotional core in books like that. And like this one, that's why I had such a hard time with it. It's because I would be reading and then there's so much child death in this book, and there's so much like people, like loved ones dying and people having to really confront that it's so, like I kept reading things and then my mind didn't want to go there, and it would like check me out. And so I kept listening, but I wasn't paying attention. And that's why I had to go back and read it again, because I was losing chunks because my mind just did not want to make sense of this. And when I think that's where the God is cruel is coming in, is King is really grappling with how can I believe in someone where does my belief in God mean I have to believe that all of this is a plan? And I think, I don't know if I think he really comes to a conclusion or if I come to a conclusion, but it just, this is a hard book to read, you know?
And I just want to say, like, I think that when like Marinville like does that crack, I think that actually makes it more realistic. Like, I mean, I feel like, you know, God, I don't know how much we're going to hit about AA, but like when you're confronted with truly horrific stuff, often like there is an instinct to crack wise against it. And AA meetings can be full of incredibly, to me, hilarious, but other people might find incredibly insensitive, like jokes and laughter and whatnot, because there's a group of people who've all faced death, you know, and you have to like respond to it in some way. So I think that's realistic. And then also, I think that we talked about this last time I was on with Dolores Claiborne, right? Yep. Which is that.
Oh, wait, actually, Rose Matter was your last one.
Rose Matter, right. He is such a sincere writer.
Yeah.
He is painfully sincere. When he is trying to say something that he really means, like it just like bleeds off the page. And I think I can't think of a book of his that's insincere. I think that's one of the reasons like why we nerds love him so much. Like he really means it. I mean, he may not get it right all the time, but I think what both Jen and I are saying about the theology of the book is that while he winds up in a place that I'm not sure about, I know he got there in a way that is meaningful to him, you know?
Yeah.
And that means something for me.
Yeah. I think his prolific nature aids with his earnestness too. And this book was written in a month, which is insane to write a 700-page novel
No.
It was
You know,
a year.
Oh, was it a year? Sorry, I misread that. Well, then never mind.
A
Take
year
that
and
back.
1 month.
Sorry, I read but regardless, he is a prolific writer though,
Okay.
and he's constantly churning stuff out. And I don't know necessarily that he has that time to reflect on it and maybe hide his beliefs. I think it comes across as more sincere, the fact that he keeps putting stuff out there. And just in terms of this being sort of a return to form, which I kind of liked because I love the monster versions of King. I know there's some supernatural elements in the books leading up to it, but like Gerald's Game, Dolores Claiborne, Insomnia, leaning a little more toward the drama, less to the straight up horror. So when I was reading this, I just thought it was cool to be like, oh great, now we have this monster and these rotting bodies, and this is, it really is kind of King returning to form.
Yeah, I agree. Let's hop into the actual book itself. I'm going to read this synopsis from Wikipedia, but if you guys have a synopsis perhaps on your physical copies, especially the first editions, that would be good to read as well, because usually those are pretty fun. But here's what it says on Wikipedia. Desperation is a story about several people who, while traveling along the desolated Highway 50 in Nevada, get abducted by Kali Intragian, the deputy of the fictional mining town of Desperation. Intragian uses various pretexts for the abductions, from an arrest for drug possession to quote-unquote rescuing a family from a non-existent gunman. It becomes clear to the captives that Intragian has been possessed by an evil being named Tak, who has control over the surrounding desert wildlife and must change host to keep itself alive. They begin to fight for their freedom, sanity, and lives before realizing that if they are ever to escape Desperation, they must trap Tak in the place from which he came. So, how does that differ from perhaps the first edition?
Nevada is a mostly long stretch of desert you cross on the way to somewhere else, and with someone else, if you're lucky. Because it's a scary place, headed down Route 50 in the brutal summer heat are people who never are going to reach their destinations. Like the Jacksons, a professor and his wife going to New York City, the Carvers, a Wentworth, Ohio family bound for a vacation at Lake Tahoe, an aging literary lion, Johnny Marinville, inventing a gonzo image for himself astride a 700-pound Harley. A dead cat nailed to a road sign heralds the little mining town of Depression, a town that seems withered in the shade of a man-made mountain known as the China Pit. But it's worse than that, much worse. Regulating the traffic is Kali I can't say his last name ever. Endergrain. Whatever. An outsized uniformed madman who considers himself the only law west of the Pecos. God forbid you should be missing a license plate or find yourself with a flat tire. There's something very wrong here, all right. And Endergrain is only the surface of it. The secrets embedded in Desperation's landscape and the evil that infects the town like some viral hot zone are both awesome and terrifying. But as young David Carver seems to know, though it scares him nearly to death to realize it, so are the forces summoned to combat them. In Desperation, Stephen King's sweeping brush paints an apocalyptic drama of God and evil, madness and revelation. His genius for suspense has never been so finely honed. His imagination so shudderingly vivid as when his wayfarers and the people who dare to follow their course begin to discover the true meaning of the word desperation.
It's true.
Pretty good.
So yeah, let's hop over now. We've already discussed a lot of the spiritual ideas, but yeah, let's zero in on them a little bit in a section we call the hook.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
So I thought it might be helpful to begin by discussing David's conversion a little bit. I think that's kind of where the God stuff begins. And it is sort of a kind of a whiplash moment in the book because we spend so much of the early pages witnessing Kali pulling people over, terrorizing them, bringing them to this small mining town, and basically people not knowing what's happening. The book begins with Mary and Peter Jackson, a New York couple driving, and kind of, I think their experience with Kali is one of the most terrifying of the book because there is just this general sense of authority being abused, your rights not being recognized, and also just a lot of genuine terror, such as when he throws in "I am going to kill you" within the Miranda right reading, which is such a cool little segment. And then, that basically ends with Peter getting shot and dying at the end of the first chapter. So we kind of spend the early part of the book with a lot of scenes like that. So then it is a little bit jarring when roughly roughly 140 pages in, we start to experience the spiritual conversion, the Christianity of this 10-year-old boy. And I thought that there was some interesting quotes here regarding his turn. So I'll just read this one and see where that takes us. Like most spiritual conversions, David Carver's was dramatic only on the outside. On the inside, it was quiet, almost mundane, not rational perhaps. Matters of the spirit may never be strictly rational, but possessed of its own cleric and logic. And to David, at least, its genuineness was beyond question. He had found God, that was all. And this he considered probably more important, God had found him. I guess like when you guys were first reading this, was that intense spirituality, the sense that this is the direction the book is going in, was that something of a shock to you?
I think a little bit for me, mostly because of how earnest it is, like, and how innocent he kind of comes to it. And I think it's partly because he's a child, but I feel like a lot of times when we read characters that are religious or are finding God, it's either like the scales fall away from their eyes and they have this big rapture, or they like suddenly know a lot of the things to say. And I love that he's just like, in certain moments when he's praying, he's just, tell me what to do. I want to believe, tell me how to do that. And I really enjoyed that a lot. And I thought that was an approach I could see myself having, or I would like to be able to have. I don't know.
Yeah.
Seems easier said than done in some ways, but
yeah. I think for me, one of the things that really strikes me about the early chapters about David's conversion is his mentor, the minister who sort of is working with him, who is this very flawed, very sad person who is fascinated by the simplicity and the innocence of David's faith. As somebody who I think, probably struggled with the unsustainability that is a lot of modern Christianity. Well, not even modern, just Christianity in general. And that's something that I think I struggled with, this idea of having a very pigeonholed God, a very strict idea of what God is. This is somebody who is a preacher, but he's clearly an alcoholic, and he's developing this. And I do find it kind of funny that there's all these moments where he's like trying to prove that he's not being creepy with David, but I do find it interesting that he is so fascinated by David, because I think it reminds him of perhaps where his faith started and how hard it is to reckon with the cruelties of faith and the cruelties of God, and what that can do to you as you get older if you don't properly reckon with it, or perhaps if you always fall back on the old adages of God is a plan, things of that nature. God is love. King never really touches on those concepts of God is love. For him, it's like spirituality is both a calming spiritual thing that you experience on the inside, but it's also something that manifests in a lot of hardship on the outside, I think. So
yeah, I personally get frightened when little kids are so religious. So in my mind's eye, I saw Isaac from Children of the Corn. Every time they talked about David, that's what I saw, was like almost him staring out into space and speaking, like a vessel of God, and just, ooh, that is terrifying to me.
Was he dressed like Isaac?
Yeah, the black hat and everything too.
I wanted to say that I really actually appreciate this section. It is, again, it reminds me a lot of my own experience with coming to believe in God, of being presented with what I thought of as pretty much a miracle. Like, I won't get too much in my story, but it was an emergency room situation,
Yeah.
And also, in that situation, it's a little embarrassing, but when I woke up, I had a thought that was not my own. To me, that's what it seemed like.
Yeah.
And so when King talks about that being one of the major kind of expressions of David's faith, like when he feels like he hears something that's not his, like, I'm not saying that's happened like literally like twice to me.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not like I'm like hearing stuff, but to have a thought that seems foreign, and it's a thought that's like, like loving, kind, but also kind of cruel in its own way, which is like, you have to get through this. Like, this is like, this is it, Ana, like,
Right. Yeah.
So there was that I really identified with. And then I think it's some of the best writing in the book too. Like, I have some word processor of the God stuff from this section for sure. And also, I just wanted to point out for us AA stands that on page 185, he has David saying a prayer that I will read to you the prayer, and then I'm going to read you one of the AA prayers because I think it's pretty similar. Like, so
Yeah.
Lord, make me useful to myself and help me to remember that until I am, I can't be useful to others. Help me to remember that you are my creator. I am what you made, sometimes the thumb in your hand, sometimes the tongue in your mouth. Make me a vessel which is whole to your service. Thanks. Amen. And then this is what's called a third step prayer in AA, which is the third step is where you turn your life over to a God of your understanding. God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self so that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. To me, those echo each other in a really strong way.
Yeah.
Maybe consciously, probably not. And yes, AA does throw in these and thous for no good reason. It was, prayer was written in the 30s. There's no reason to have that kind of language,
Yeah.
but they wanted
Did
to make
that
it.
immediately? Did that AA prayer like immediately come to you when you read that section?
Yeah, actually, like this time when I was going through it, it happens to be I'm doing some step work right now too. But yeah, especially like the make me useful to myself and help me remember until I can't be useful to others. That I feel like is a real seed in the third step prayer that makes it easier to swallow for a lot of us who think, well, if I'm supposed to be of service, I'm supposed to be of service to God, and that's my primary goal, then am I supposed to sacrifice myself? Am I supposed to do that? And I think both the AA prayer and that prayer make clear, like, no, it's not about sacrificing yourself. It's about being wholly yourself and putting that to service to God. And then also, he doesn't explicitly say relieve me of the bondage of self in that prayer, obviously, but I feel like there is sort of this sense of like, I'm giving myself to you. Right.
Yeah.
I actually read an academic paper comparing the religious themes from this book just to the actual wording of the Bible, and it seems that a lot of times when he takes the prayers in this book, the wording is not exact on purpose. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had that exposure to it during his own experiences in AA and took it and just kind of modified it a little bit, just to give it that king twist.
Well, it's true too. I mean, people don't really, I think a lot of times, we don't memorize the Bible word for word. We take the essence of it that really works for us, and kind of the prayer becomes shaped to our own experiences in our own lives. So I feel like it's more honest in that way to the characters, so.
And this is what I think I kept referring to earlier, is I kind of see this entire story as King wrestling with those steps and trying to really work his way around it. And like, what does that actually mean to sacrifice and to do? I have not worked any steps, so I don't have the words, but what does it mean to say that I'm going to be a vessel? Like, who is the vessel and what is this vessel going to make me do? And that's really scary. That's the reason that I haven't worked any of the steps, is that I got to that first one and I saw that word powerless and I was like, nope, not for me. Maybe someday, but no, I'm not going to do that. And a lot of that comes from this background I have of like, I have a father who's very narcissistic, and that like codes a lot of what I see God as this is what you will do. I don't care if you understand. You're doing it because I tell you to. And I feel like when I can rise above that and like kind of look at the bigger picture, I can see that I think it is more nuanced than that, but it's hard to get out of that. And that's what I think I see with David and Johnny. I feel like they're almost like the angels and the demons sitting on King's shoulders, like whispering in his ear, trying to make sense of what that actually means for him.
Yeah. Similar to kind of, I feel like some of the things you were saying touches on this quote from page 219. David didn't answer. This wasn't the kind of thing you could discuss rationally, even if there was time, because faith wasn't rational. This was something Reverend Martin had told him over and over again, drilling him with it like some important spelling rule. I before E except after C. Sane men and women don't believe in God. That was all. That was flat. You can't say it from the pulpit because the congregation would run you out of town, but it's the truth. God isn't about reason. God is about faith and belief. God says, sure, take away the safety net. And when that's gone, take away the tightrope too. I thought that was really beautiful writing and something that really resonated with me. And it also just touches on how, he touches on the idea that faith isn't rational, which I think that's why it's so hard to write about it. It's so hard to write about God and faith and belief in Christianity without sounding hokey or without sounding, I don't know, simplistic. There's a nuance to the way he writes these sections that comes clearly from something that he struggled with and things that have been told to him. It's really hard to accept that, you know, there will never, I mean, and this is why I think it's interesting that we do get quote unquote proof in The Stand and in this. But I mean, I guess that's the thing that I always struggled with, was the idea. And I love what you brought up about Glenn saying this is the most evidence we've had for God, because I had become so accustomed when I was Christian to the idea that there will never be proof, you know, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, and that's why my friends all thought I was crazy when I was really Christian, because they would bring up certain questions to me and I wouldn't have answers. And they took that as sort of a symbol that I didn't understand my faith enough, perhaps. But I think in a way it's just representative of the idea that you are giving away a part of your rationality in your mind and replacing it with faith and belief. And so I don't know, I thought this was a really beautiful articulation of that, and something that really resonated with me, and something I think about a lot whenever I think about faith. And, you know, and I think, like, I don't know, I always apply it to like ghosts and shit too, because I'm just kind of like, I love believing in ghosts, but if we don't have proof of ghosts by now, we're never going to get it. So it's kind of like...
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just on that really quick too. The walking with no tightrope too. That really reminded me of the leap of faith from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where you have to cross the bridge that's not there. You know, you have to kind of let go of the earth and just trust in God. So I thought that was a fun line. Yeah,
and that you know, that kind of dovetails with Kierkegaard and like religious existentialism and those kind of concepts. You know, Kierkegaard was one of the first philosophers to really reckon with the existential quandaries of Christianity, and was something that I also took. I kind of started to take comfort in as I was losing my faith. It was something I kind of was reading to help reckon with what I had been through the years previous. But yeah, the idea of the leap of faith, that's a very Kierkegaard kind of concept, and one that I think, you know, is represented in a lot of ways here, especially with Johnny's character as we near the end of the book. So.
And that's ultimately what I think The Stand is supposed to be too, is that it's a small step and you stand up and you say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to say what I believe. You know?
Yeah. That's cool. Let's talk about the cruelty of God as it's represented in the book Desperation. This concept really starts to surface near kind of the climax of the book. David has this pretty creepy kind of vision where he's walking through Desperation and he's seeing the various characters that Tack has possessed, including his mother. And this section to me was very powerful. Page 440 in my edition. From the bushes at the side of the path stepped his mother. Her face was black and wrinkled, an ancient bag of dough. Her eyes drooped. The sight of her in this state filled him with sorrow and horror. Yes, your God is strong, she said. No argument there. But look what he's done to me. Is this strength worth admiring? Is this a God worth having? She held her hands out to him, displaying her rotting palms. God didn't do that, David said, and he began to cry. The policeman did it. But God let it happen, she countered, and one of her eyeballs dropped out of her head. The same God who let Tragian push Kirsten downstairs and then hang her body on a hook for you to find. What God is this? Turn aside from him and embrace mine. Mine is at least honest about his cruelty. That was a line that really stood out to me. Mine is at least honest about his cruelty. I don't know. Jen, you look like you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah. I had that in word processor with the gods because I absolutely loved that. Yeah, because I think when I look at this now, I think it to me it almost reads as balance rather than good and evil, and maybe this is a longer conversation for later. But yeah, the concept of God is cruel is the one that I really, really wrestled with in this book, and that really kind of kept sticking with me. And I pulled a couple that kind of demonstrate that too. And one is when David is talking to Brian's mother in the hospital and saying, how could God let that man not remember hitting my son with his car? And then I think, how could God be so merciful to someone who deserves to wake up screaming with memories of the blood coming out of my son's poor head every night for the rest of his life? And then later she says, a God who loves drunks and hates little boys. And that one is the one that stuck me, especially like as a drunk, because we're talking like it's a miracle that I'm alive, but it's a miracle that other people are alive, or that other people are not dead because of me, you know, like I have. So that just hit me, and it was like, is this a plan? Like, I don't want to be part of that plan. You know, it's something that really, I'm still wrestling with it, you know?
Yeah.
I think too, like, the example that gets brought up a lot with is God cruel or just is, children dying of diseases or whatnot. And I think Pi, I think her name is Kristen, right?
Kirsten.
Yeah,
Kirsten. Oh, like Kirsten Dunst. Okay. Anyway.
Moment of levity, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. Speaking of children dying, anyway, but like in Brian's death as well, right? There's not really, it's hard to make sense of this, right? You'll never comprehend it, right? You'll never get over it. And I think that lends toward that cruel God, right? And it wouldn't really be a Stephen King book too without a high body count. I think some other authors might have at the end when they overcome the bad guy, these characters maybe resurrect or, go back to normal or travel in time. And I think King, I like that he kind of sticks with the old school. No, once you're dead, you're dead. And there's a lot of cruelty that is just going to be a mystery to the world.
Yeah.
I want to say that I think in some ways, like once you choose to believe that there is a power greater than yourself, then the cruelty is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's expressed sometimes in more obvious ways, but again, I'll just bring it back to the pandemic. Like people are dying, like thousands of people are dying every day. And each one of those is going to seem cruel to a lot of people. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you choose to believe that there is something out there, all of that has to be accounted for. And I was just thinking about, because I am rereading The Shining like right now.
Oh, nice.
It occurred to me because I was trying to like, if in Stephen King's universe, there is all kinds of cruelty. And since he believes in a God, like there has to be reasons that it's happening for him, except I also think in the sort of wider King's dominion, the other way that he talks about higher power is of kind of disinterested higher power, right? Like the turtle.
Yeah.
And to me, that is actually kind of a more like the God of my understanding is, I sometimes say he's not a bellhop God. Like I can't just be like, hey, need some help over here. Come on. Like he's not going to like, he's got billions of other people to be looking after.
Yeah.
Also, is he really looking after every one of them? I find that hard to believe. My God has never been like, he's got an individual itty bitty plan for every one of us. It's more like we're all dust motes.
Yeah.
And
that's kind of like sorry, go ahead.
Well, if we're all dust motes, then some dust motes are going to go this way and some dust motes are going to go that way. And yes, it's part of some larger articulation, like some larger, I guess I have to stick with the metaphor, like wind or something. But it doesn't mean there's an individual thing that's supposed to happen to you,
Yeah.
It's just every once in a while, I feel like you're granted, if in my understanding in my life, I feel like every once in a while I'm granted a vision of like what that larger, beautiful, like the stars in the sky kind of thing, what that larger universe that is under some grand plan might be. But me, I'm just like the most minuscule part of that.
Well, and to tie it to the purposeful and the random from Insomnia, it's like there are some in King's theory of that book is that there are a larger world of the dust motes, and then there are a couple of linchpin people. And I think we really all want to believe that we are a purposeful person, and like that what I do really affects everything else, because it's terrifying to think of yourself as a dust mote. And I think I would like to one day get myself to a place where that is peaceful to me, that like this is something like I don't have to affect the rest of the world, but I think there's a lot of fear there,
Yeah. I love that. I just watched a documentary called A Glitch in the Matrix. That's all about people.
That.
Yeah. It's fun. And it's all about like people who believe we live in a computer simulation. And one of the big takeaways from that is that a lot of that belief is rooted in a certain narcissism, the idea that I am more special and everyone around me are NPCs,
Yeah.
And I feel like that's tied in a lot of ways to perhaps maybe the narcissism of Christianity, which is that, God perhaps has a plan for me that makes me, a big grand plan for me that is perhaps more important than everyone else. But I love also what you're saying, Jen, about the purposeful and the random, because I feel like we do get shades of that here, and that idea of the people who actually are more important, like like the Patrick Danvilles, like David Carver, obviously, I think falls into that here. He's the one who a child shall lead them, as they say. Which is interesting. Speaking of God's cruelty, though, I think the line that I think has been resonating throughout my mind a lot throughout, in the time since I've read this is God's cruelty is refining. That's sort of the answer an answer that King gives us in this book. And that's said by the spiritual figure that David encounters in his dream that turns out later to be this younger version of Johnny Marinville in the Viet Cong Lookout. He says, God's cruelty is refining. And then there's this exchange where David asks, where the mine and God is the miner? Well, and all cruelty is good. God is good and cruelty is good. No, hardly any of it is good, David says. And so that to me was an answer that I turned around in my head quite a bit. This idea of God's cruelty being refining, but then about 100 pages later, when they're in the mine, and after Ralph is basically, his face gets destroyed by the eagle that Tack has inhabited, and Johnny sort of has this moment with David where he's like, you can say all day that you think you understand God's cruelty, like it's a concept for you, but it's not real to you yet. And I thought that that moment was really powerful as well. Is God in you? David asked. Can you feel him in there, Johnny, like a hand or a fire? Yes, Johnny said. Then you won't take this wrong. David spit into his face. It was warm on the skin below Johnny's eyes, like tears. Johnny made no effort to wipe away the boy's spittle. Listen to me, David. I'm going to tell you something you didn't learn from your minister or your Bible. For all I know, it's a message from God himself. Are you listening? David only looked at him, saying nothing. You said God is cruel the way a person who's lived his whole life on Tahiti might say snow is cold. You knew, but you didn't understand. He stepped close to David and put his palms on the boy's cold cheeks. Do you know how cruel your God can be, David? How fantastically cruel? David waited, saying nothing. Maybe listening, maybe not. Johnny couldn't tell. Sometimes he makes us live. That line to me also really resonated. And that to me felt, I'm not somebody who's been through AA, but would you say that that's a line that dovetails with that, with sort of the theology of the higher power, the idea that God, living is perhaps, I don't know, there's cruelty in just living?
I would say that I think it sort of dovetails into, again, I bet Jen wants to be careful with this too. When we talk about AA theology, it's like, again, it's a God of my understanding. Like,
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
There is no official AA theology. There's sort of like some ways of talking about God that are consistent with the way that AA talks about God. But the specifics of whatever it is you believe, there are Bible thumpers in AA. One of my best friends in AA is truly an atheist. Now, how it makes it work for him, I don't know, but he is. But for me, the cruelty of God is refining idea, to me, that is sort of like, in order to get where I am today, like, I think I can say a lot of cruel things happened to me.
Yeah.
I also exerted a lot of cruelty on people. Like Jen was saying, like, it's not only a miracle that I'm alive, but it's a miracle that some other people are alive that should be dead because of me. And it sounds so trite to say there's everything happens for a reason. But then when you get to a place where, like, I am sober, I am alive, I am doing pretty good in terms of, like, not waking up miserable every day, not hating myself every day, which, by the way, The Shining is so good about that.
Yeah.
Like, that's my alternative, is the existence of Jack Torrance.
Yeah.
So I had to go through a lot of pain to get here. So in that way, cruelty is refining, because I don't know if I would have gotten here if all that shit didn't happen to me. So
Yeah.
I would echo all of that. And that, I think, one of the things that I do like about LAAA is that there is not one understanding, which was so opposite to everything I had heard growing up in church, is that this is the way, I am the truth, the way, and the light. And AA, I really think it's your understanding, because I think the cruelty being refining is another thing that I've really, really turned over, because I think that takes a certain amount of trust, because what am I being refined to? What is your end result for me going to be? If I'm a vessel, it's like what I said earlier, what are you going to make me do? And I think I have just recently watched The Vow. And I don't want to equate any of what we're talking about to a cult. I want to be very clear about that. But there is a level of, in order to break someone's mind, you are consistently cruel and telling people to ignore the part of your brain that says this hurts, this is cruel. And I feel like that's where I get. The second time I read this, that really frightened me. Like, what is the cruelty going to end up being? And like, what is there a part of me that's saying this is cruel and I don't want that anymore because it's too cruel? And that's where I think I really wrestle, is the understanding that I have of God, and that I feel like King is kind of bringing out I don't want to be refined to that, you know?
Yeah. One comment too that I did like in terms of Randall speaking about refinement is it's actually a mining term as well. You know, when you're smelting, you're reducing it down, you're trying to get basically a higher purity of coal or metal. So I think that's a cool little symbolism too between the China mine pit and the, idea of like refining spiritually.
So very present in The Stand when they walk through the desert and they fast, not entirely by choice. I feel like also just have to say something to Jenn about the vow versus the cruelty, which is that I feel like one of the things that I have taken into my life as a way of understanding spirituality and my higher power is that I'm supposed to feel the pain. I am supposed to feel that. And one of the things I gain in sobriety is the ability to acknowledge my pain and live through it rather than escape it, rather than deny it, which is what, the use of chemicals or shopping or sex or whatever it is that you might find yourself addicted to, like you're escaping all those feelings. And I think the vow is about escape. I think you're right. You're supposed to ignore that pain. You're supposed to think that like, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And I think in some ways, like my version of what cruelty happens, what pain happens, that's not how I experience. I just experience like, wow, this really hurts. I'm really hurting right now.
Well, that reminds me, I mean, I feel like that aligns with Johnny's line about sometimes he makes us live. Like we can't, we have to walk through the pain. And like, I feel like that's what Johnny can offer David, because he has, I think he spent his years as a drunk and as an abuser trying to hide away from a lot of those really traumatic moments. And King uses those moments here, such as the one where he got pushed in the pool by his wife and walked out holding a beer and everybody took photos of him. And he keeps coming back to that memory because it is a moment of profound humiliation and pain for him that he can't get rid of anymore, because he doesn't have access to those, to those chemicals. And so that idea of, I feel like that line really hits, because you think about the history that Johnny's endured and the pain that he's inflicted on others and that he's inflicted on himself, and that living, that is its own kind of anguish and cruelty, because you have no escape from those things that you've done. So,
and there's a moment at the end when Tack is trying to tempt Johnny. He says, "I can make the pain stop." That I wrote. It's like that's why I drank. I just wanted it to stop hurting, And
speaking of Johnny, what do we make of sort of his conversion here? Does it strike you as authentic? Because he really gets on his knees and begs David to help him, and it is an interesting moment of vulnerability for the character, and one that is a far cry from where we first met him, where he's a bit of an asshole, and here he's very much making himself vulnerable to this child who is in his belief touched by God. So Johnny as a character, that moment of conversion, did that ring as authentic for you or not?
I would actually say, like, I think the stuff talking about his ex-wife in the beginning, it seems like he's a guy that has a lot of guilt that he's carrying around, and maybe he's not acknowledging it. And I think this is sort of an act of atonement. I kind of compare him to Larry Underwood from The Stand, because he has kind of that, you know, rock star artist life. He's causing scenes at hip parties, and, you know, he's kind of in the national consciousness and discussion. So I think it was kind of a cool transition from him, and I think he just was ready to kind of step it up and be the hero after being the villain for so many years.
I have a tangent.
Do it.
Who do we think King is thinking of when he with Johnny Marinville? Because he seems to have the cultural cachet of a Stephen King, let's say.
Yeah.
But he's supposed to be like, I guess, Norman Mailer. But because I'm trying,
That's literally what I have
I'm trying
in
to
my
think
notes.
of like
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Who the fuck? Like, what author is considered
Hunter
like to
S.
be
Thompson.
Nobel Prize worthy, or at least in that like range, and just kind of a rock star? Like, I don't know, like Jonathan Franzen,
Yeah.
not quite. I mean,
The names I wrote down
You
were
know.
Norman Mailer and Sam Shepard were the people who I felt like
Sam
those
Shepard.
yeah wait yeah those were the two.
No, I had Hunter S. Thompson, because they do refer to his style of writing as Gonzo,
Oh, interesting.
which was the style pioneered by Thompson, and
and
obviously
like went to Vietnam.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's-
I Thompson did go to
military,
Vietnam, but,
rode
like,
motorcycles, obviously substance issues. I don't think Johnny's quite at that level. I think, you know, he's a little more of a literary deer, so maybe he does have a
Yeah, see, that's what I keep on having trouble with, is like someone who's up with the Nobel Prize for Literature, but also
It's like if
Yeah.
if
movies.
if Jonathan Franzen was into like guns or something, like shooting the corrections with a machine gun, then maybe.
I'm having a hard time like finding like women at book readings throwing
It's
themselves.
like
at
Arthur
Jonathan
Miller,
Franzen.
and I guess it's like Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
You know, it's like this idea that he was with, like, you know, America's sweetheart actress or whatever. It feels like an amalgam of a lot of different literary archetypes, which to me was amusing. But yeah, I absolutely. I think Norman Mailer was the one, although probably a more attractive version. But yeah. Any other thoughts on Johnny's conversion?
I really enjoyed that. Not so much the conversion part, but there was a part that I pulled from page 481. When a person stops changing, stops feeling, they die. The times you've tried to kill yourself since, you were just playing catch up. And I think that the conversion I see is not necessarily a religious conversion for him, but just a conversion of joining in the world again. And in that way, I really see a lot of parallels with Jack Torrance too, of like, I'm doing the right things, I'm getting by, but I've stopped feeling. And I think that felt really honest to me, and something that I've really struggled with. Is to, like, Anna, what you were saying earlier, like to let myself feel things and to let myself know, because you can't feel the good stuff unless you feel the bad stuff sometimes too. And that's just, you know, so that moment really, really affected me. But I think also whenever King writes a writer, I always think it's like, I always see him writing about himself. And I think this is the person he's afraid he is, you know, rather than seeing somebody else.
I confess, like, so of course, yes, whenever King writes a writer, you have to kind of look for the autobiographical stuff. So I was really stuck on the groupies thing.
I know. I was like, have you been to some parties? Don't tell Tabitha.
Yeah, I know. I was like, geez, like, Steve,
I know.
like, does Tabitha know?
Surely
Yeah.
she's
No,
read
I think
this.
too. Yeah, his like obsession with rock and roll, you can tell there's a little bit of escapism with Johnny, where it's like, imagine if writers were treated like rock
Right.
stars.
Yeah.
I'm a writer. Yeah. No, but I do the same thing. Whenever you see an author, you have to assume he's writing somewhat from himself, and then little details, you're like, is this just the character, or is this Stephen King? And it's always a fun game to kind of pick and choose and fantasize about Stephen just hauling ass on a Harley with a bunch of girls chasing him down the road.
Yeah, I have some more thoughts in Heroes and Villains about his I don't know. We'll get to it. I'll talk about it later. But yeah, I think I guess the way that I perceive his conversion, quote unquote, is this just kind of a humbling, right? It's which to me is, it just made me think a lot about nudging yourself out of being the most important person in your life, perhaps, you know, and acknowledging that higher power and accepting help, you know. That was what that moment really resonated as to me, and something that I found, you know, for the most part, profoundly moving. And if, you know, I think I think sometimes it's hard for me to reckon with the things David says as a 10-year-old boy because they can be so, poetic and mature. And so I think sometimes perhaps the impact of certain scenes was nullified by me imagining this happening with a 10-year-old boy. So let's pivot over to the concept of a higher power. I pulled some stuff from recovery.org, which I don't know if that's the best resource, but the second step of recovery being a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The purpose of that being this step gives you hope you are not alone and something higher than you can help you conquer your addiction and despair. And as we've discussed, the site included a myth that your higher power has to be God. This is a big misconception about AA. Your higher power can be anything that you believe in: the universe, nature, Buddha, music, love, Allah, humanity, or even AA itself. It doesn't require you to believe in anything you don't want to. Each step is a suggestion. And and I just found some sections that that I think fed into that a little bit. And one of these touches on the title of the book, and this was something that made me think of one of the quotes we read earlier, which I'll get to in a moment, but page 446 in my edition. And what is the spiritual state of the faithful? Love and acceptance, I think. And what is the opposite of faith? That was tougher, a real hairball, in fact, like one of those damned reading achievement tests. Pick A, B, C, or D, except here you didn't even get the choices. Disbelief, he ventured? No, not disbelief, but unbelief. The first is natural, the second willful. And when one is in unbelief, David, what is that one spiritual state? He thought about it, then shook his head. I don't know. Yes, you do. He thought about it and realized he did. The spiritual state of unbelief is desperation. And that just made me think a little bit about when King discussed earlier about choosing to believe. And when he says there's no downside to that. And that concept of, if you don't believe in God, if you say there's no evidence of God, then you're missing the stars in the sky, the sun rises, the sun sets, all of those kind of things. And I don't know, I think that state of desperation for me, when you have nothing to believe in, then that is kind of your go-to state. How else did we perceive that line, and how that perhaps ties to the title and the fact that this is clearly an important line for King?
So one thing I would say is that to me, this really is a third step book, not a second step book, but
oh, okay.
well, maybe it is supposed to be both, but to me it is like the third step being like you give yourself over, like you turn your will and your life over to the power greater than yourself. And the other thing is, I actually just thought of this because we're talking so much of AA specifically in this book. There is a very famous line like that we say a lot in AA, which is the gift of desperation.
Interesting.
Yeah, to be given the gift of desperation, which means that you have to get sober. Like there's just no choice for you. No choice for you. I mean, there's always a choice. Like, I mean, obviously there's always a choice. You can just stay miserable if you want to. But I do wonder if like King even thought about that. What a funny way to think of this book.
Yeah.
Well, and the other AA line that comes to my mind is living life on life's terms and saying, I don't have, I like the stars in the sky, I don't have control over them, and I don't have to have control. And what I do is not, this is where I get stuck because I still really wrestle with a lot of this,
Jen, call me anytime.
I think I might. I do appreciate you helping me kind of work through a lot of this because it's just these big clouds, of things that are just.
It's a curse. It's a gift of desperation in terms of like obviously the gift of desperation is how badly we need to change to get sober. And then I do believe growing up with any kind of set concept of God is a curse, especially when you're trying to get sober. I think there are two big obstacles getting sober. One is being very rich and famous. And the other is having grown up religious. So.
Well, and that's, I think when he says the scars, one of the first quotes I think you read, I think I've got a lot of those scars.
Yeah. And that quote too, life is more than just steering a course around pain, and I feel like that applies to what we were discussing previously. But I think just in terms of acknowledging that, that is the difficulty of living, is you sort of have to plow through that, but it does refine you and it does make you stronger. Yeah. And then and I did see the language, or at least things that spoke to addiction, and that's obviously a very common theme throughout King, especially during the period when he was getting sober. I remember when we talked about Misery, which I believe was one of the last books he wrote before he got sober. Tommyknockers was the last. But Misery and Tommyknockers, though, they're really, really filled with that language of addiction, things that that's sort of baked into the stories of them. And then, the stuff he was writing when he was sober, some of the first stuff he wrote, like The Library Policeman, very much reckons with sobriety. I think, especially fresh sobriety, like just being right out of it. But yeah, there was just a couple sections I pulled. One of which was when Steve and Cynthia are in the car, and they and basically the cantas, those little statues, come out. The language used here I thought was really evocative. If he could keep them diverted from that piece of stone a little while longer, he thought he'd be okay. But for a few seconds there, it had been bad, maybe the worst thing that had ever happened to him. In those seconds, he had known how guys like Ted Bundy must feel. He could have killed her, maybe would have killed her if he hadn't broken his physical contact with her when he had. Or he supposed she might have killed him. It was as if sex and murder had somehow changed places in this horrible little town, except even sex wasn't what it was about, not really. He remembered how when she had touched the wolf, the lights had flickered and the radio had come back on. And that moment there, I think, dovetails with later when Johnny is basically in Tack's lair going there. And it says, and everywhere scattered among the remains were cantas, coyotes with spider tongues, spiders with weird albino ratlings poking from their mouths, spread-winged bats with obscene baby tongues. The babies were leering gnomish. Some depicted nightmarish creatures that had never existed on Earth, halfling freaks that made Johnny's eyes hurt. He could feel the cantas calling to him, pulling him as the moon pulls its salt water. He had sometimes been pulled in that same way by a sudden craving to take a drink or to gobble a sweet dessert or to lick along the smooth velvet lining of a woman's mouth with his tongue. The cantas spoke in tones of madness, which he recognized from his own past life. Sweetly reasonable voices proposing unspeakable acts, but the cantas would have no power over him unless he stopped and bent and touched them. If he could avoid despair that would come disguised as curiosity, he reckoned he would be all right.
I mean, that's temptation. Those cantas those are drinks,
Yeah.
They're there,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, that the cantas very much came to represent, I think, those, totems
it's addiction.
of addiction.
Yeah, it's addiction. Like, I think that I appreciate that he has, sweets and sex sort of in the same thought.
Yeah.
Because it's all in distraction. And it's not wanting to feel whatever it is you're feeling. And again, rereading The Shining, like I actually read The Shining when I was in the psych ward.
Oh, okay.
Reread it once in the psych ward. I don't know how they let me keep it, but the scene where it was a public hospital, I didn't have a lot, the scene where the bottles reappear remains one of the most frightening things he's ever written for me.
Yeah.
Like to go as far as you can from all that temptation and discover the temptation is inside you is, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And that's that life's terms, is like these things are always going to exist, and it's understanding how to conquer them without having to physically remove yourself,
Yeah. Are there any themes that perhaps we didn't touch on? I mean, obviously these themes regarding God, addiction, things of that nature are sort of very predominant, as I think we've demonstrated over the last hour, is that, well, no, I think it's
2
good.
hours. I was going to ask if we're going to take a break soon.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One theme that I noticed, though, is the sort of the corruption of authority. Obviously, you have the police officer who, I mean, you have no choice but to listen, right? And what if that power suddenly is corrupted?
Yeah.
You know, it's terrifying. The idea when he's reading them the rights and he's like, I will kill you.
Yeah.
And that just slips in there. And as well as also the David's preacher that has some issues associated with him. You know, this higher power talk. It seems like everyone's answering to a different authority. And I think Ana said it earlier about like pride and maybe ego being sort of the fault of these villains. And
Johnny
especially when
Marinville.
you see a character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jenny Martin, but there's always like a hierarchy, right? And as high up as Tak is, he might be like an it creature, but then you have like the Crimson King. You always have someone above them. Same with Randall Flagg. His flaw is his ego, because as powerful as he is, there's always someone a little bit higher. So seeing some of the like Kantas and Kantoi, it was just interesting to see sort of the ranking of authority and where it breaks down.
I think there are themes to King, which, and again, anyone listening to this podcast would recognize, but childhood is in this as well. And some of the beautiful writing in the early David scenes is, you know, he does it really well. He does the corruption of childhood, or not corruption necessarily, because I think what happens with David isn't corruption. It's just loss.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's where we'll be calling it for this week, constant listeners. Stay tuned for part 2 on Desperation. And as always, enjoy these long days and pleasant nights.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot